Hello everyone, it is 2 p.m. on the East Coast and we are ready to get started. Thanks for coming back today or joining us for the first time. This is week 2 in a 5-week Bluebeam webinar series, and today is going to be all about markups and the markup list. Just a couple of quick slides for housekeeping information. You are muted, but there is a Q&A interface in the Zoom tool set that you have there. So if you have any questions, enter them in there. I may not respond to them immediately. I'll try to have some time at the end to respond to Q&As or questions. And if I don't get to your question when this recording is processed, I'll add some responses to the questions in the recording before it's uploaded to our YouTube channel. The session is being recorded. If you were with us last week, I did mention that the surveys that pop up at the end of the session when you leave are anonymous. And a few of those questions are, do you think you and your team would benefit from training? Yes or no? Would you like to discuss your needs for training? Yes or no? And then a piece of information to let us know who you are. And a couple of you said, yes, we could benefit. Yes, we'd like to discuss it. But you didn't put your ID in there. So there's just a couple of you that I have not been able to follow up with. So if you were here last week and you said you wanted to talk about your training needs and I have not contacted you, that's the reason why. So please fill out that survey again this week and include your contact information, and I will get in touch with you. You don't need to try to grab that URL, but that is our YouTube channel website, and at that survey at the end of the session does have a link to it, so you just be able to click right onto it. And when this session is recorded and processed, it will be uploaded to that YouTube channel as well. If you'd like to contact me after the session, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. That's my phone number, email address, and that's the web page in order to find out all about our Bluebeam training program. I didn't introduce it last week. I'll do it briefly this week. I work for Infotech, not Bluebeam. Infotech is a software company, and our entire focus is construction management, construction engineering, and inspection activities for infrastructure projects. And so many of our customer base were using Bluebeam and needed somebody to help them in implementation and training and services. That's why Infotech hired me to come on board as both an account manager and their Bluebeam subject matter expert. Real quick reminder, I will be using Revu 20, which was released about 3 weeks ago. It is extremely similar to Revu 2019 and Revu 2018. There are some differences in the markup list in particular, and I'll try to point those out today. If you're using Revu 2017 or anything older, you're going to see a very different user interface than what is on the screen. Last slide is just a quick reminder about what next week we'll cover. Next week we're going to continue with markups as we start talking about markup tool sets, libraries of symbols that you can use over and over again and create, establish, and enforce standards. Okay, so on my screen, I'm using Revu, and I've got an empty PDF file with just a few markups inside of it. And today we're going to start with creating some markups. We're mainly going to go down the right-hand side of the interface where the markup tools are generally located. We will go into the tools pull down, and we'll go through markups, stamps, measurement markups, sketch to scale, and some other information as well. If we look at the toolbars on the right-hand side, not every markup is in that toolbar over there. For example, if I go into tools and markup, the first thing is text box, the second thing is typewriter, and then the toolbar over there goes to highlight and pen and call out. So it skips note, and occasionally it skips one or two of these other things. So don't just presume that everything you see on the screen is everything that's possible. So let's start with just a simple line. I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to come down here and choose the let's place a line markup command. And I'm going to come over here to hit a data point. And we hit a data point and we start rubber banding that line around. While it's doing that, I want to draw your attention to the upper left-hand portion of the screen where we've got the Properties toolbar. The thing about that property toolbar is it's dynamic and it's context sensitive. So what it shows and how it's interfacing with you will change depending upon the markup type that you're currently creating or you've selected to modify. So if I instead go from a line, say I want to place a cloud, now I've got a series of variables up here in the properties toolbar that are relevant to clouds. If I instead go to a highlighter, if I instead go down to a call out or a cloud plus, you can see where now the properties toolbar has so many variables, it's taking up the entire user interface for that little section of the interface. Keep your eye up there as you're placing markups and you'll be able to control what you're about to do before you even do it. For example, if I go to place that line again, it's assuming I want a red line. Here is the opacity of the line itself. These are the line styles. I could change the line style. I could change the thickness. I could change whether it begins or ends with an arrowhead or some other type of graphic, but I could change all of that before I even draw the line. But if I'm happy with a single thin, regular red line, I can just hit a data point and start placing it. Now, last week, we talked about how you can turn on a grid and you can turn on a grid lock and you can force your data points to go directly to that grid. But that's really not necessary. If you want to place a line and you want to make sure it's absolutely horizontal or vertical or at a 45-degree angle, as you begin placing the line, just hold down the Shift key. The Shift key is going to lock it to 0, 45, 90, and any version of that as you go around the clock. So now I can hit a data point and I can be assured that that's an absolute 0-degree angled line. We're going to place another well, I do want to point out here, though, that you'll notice as soon as I place a line, it stops doing that and wants me to do something else. And that also brings us back to last week where I mentioned this reuse markup tool. I tend to leave that on so that whenever I choose to do something, it does it. I'll click a data point, hold down my Shift key, click a data point, and it's ready to do it again as much as I want to do it. And to get out of that mode, you press the Escape key on your keyboard, and that releases the current command and allows you to go choose something different. Now I'm going to place one of these others. I'm going to choose a cloud, and I want to point out a couple of characteristics about rectangular polygon-shaped elements like clouds. There's a couple of different ways of placing a cloud. You can click and drag your left mouse button, and it's going to give some type of rectangular shape to your cloud. Instead, you can click, let go, move your mouse, click again, click again, click again, do multiple single clicks, finally terminating with either the same start point or just click a double click and it will enter that vertice and it will close off your cloud and place a multi-sided cloud. Now I'm just doing a Control-Z standard Microsoft Windows function to undo what I had previously done. And I want to point out a couple of differences between a rectangle and a polygon. A rectangle, when I go to place that, no matter what I do, whether I click and hold the button down or not, it forces it to be a rectangle. However, if I use a polygon, I can click and drag and it looks like a rectangle. Here I can also click and click and click and click and eventually double click and get a multi-sided polygon. And when I'm working in a drawing with multiple markups and I select a markup, it not only grabs it and highlights it for me for manipulation, it also highlights it down in the markup list if you've got that displayed. To save screen real estate, a lot of people leave that closed, but if you'll leave it open or slide it up slightly, as you're working on your markups, it will tell you exactly what the thing you're working on is. Like this is a polygon, this is a rectangle. And what that means is it means they have different behaviors. Every time you have a markup highlighted, there are vertices on it, these little yellow buttons that are called control points. And what happens when you grab and drag a control point with your left mouse button varies depending on the type of markup that you've placed. We can see here what happens with a polygon. Instead, if I grab a rectangle and grab the same similar vertice and click and drag, you see how it has a different result and a different type of behavior because it's a different type of markup. Now I'm going to talk a bit about text, and we're going to come back and manipulate these quite a bit in the next few minutes before we move over to stamps and measurement tools and so on. When I go to place text and I place a text box, if I do it like that and then I start typing in very little text and hit my escape key, you can see where I did not use but a small portion of the great big box that I created. And there are utilities to clean that up. But first I want to describe why you want to clean that thing up. Well, I let go of it and you really can't tell it's even there. It looks fine. And if I come back later on with the selection tool and I'm trying to grab that line, well, see, they're on top of each other. And because the line was drawn first, it's behind the text. Same thing over here. If I try to get to that typewriter text, it's actually clicking on the text box up above because I left its box just so big that it's constantly in the way. You can fix that really quickly by choosing a text box and right-clicking on it and choosing this auto-size text box. What that will do is that will shrink the rectangle that you drew when you started placing the text to just big enough to accommodate what you've got in there. You can always change it. You can always drag it just a little bit bigger, or you could have it set to where it was and maybe just give it a little bit longer if you need, if you're anticipating a longer sentence, that type of thing. But leaving it where it's taking up massive amounts of room like that unnecessarily is not really a good idea. This auto-size text box here, I'm having to manually choose it, and that's really not normally how I work. There are quite a few things like that that can be pre-established and saved as a common desirable behavior. Like down here, I had my reuse markup tool turned off. I had to manually turn that on just a few minutes ago. I'm having to manually adjust this text. More commonly would be to go into Review, go into Preferences, and specifically under Tools and Markups. And there's all kinds of preferences in here that you can tweak to your personal desires. But personally for me, I go in and I set my tools with markups to automatically auto-size the text, to automatically make sure that my reuse tools lock is turned on, and I set up the preferences so that every time I start Bluebeam, I already know a particular behavior. So when I come in and place a big text box and I type in, again, very little and hit escape, it's going to automatically take care of that for me. I don't have to worry about it. You know, it does catch me from time to time where I need a little bit more room and I'll start typing in there and it word wraps and I'll have to come back and grab it and just slide it over a little bit. But the payoff of having it automatically adjust that is a lot more beneficial than simply having to change it every single time. I mentioned the properties toolbar, and one thing that's sort of quasi hidden in there I want to make sure you're aware of is the ability to set a standard. Right? When I go to place a line, we know that it's going to place a red line. When I go to place a cloud, we know it's going to place a blue cloud with no fill. We've seen that where I placed that cloud. But if that's not what I want, when I go to place this cloud, I can change it and I can tell it that I want it filled with green. I want the opacity of the fill to be about 50%. And I do want a cloud, but I just don't want it that big. So I'm going to drop it down a little bit. And now when I place a cloud, it's got the characteristics or the properties that I desire more so than what my default was. But here's the problem. It doesn't remember that. It doesn't know that I prefer that. So every time I go do something else and then I come back to place a new cloud, it reverts back to what it was previously. Now that can be avoided by modifying your default. And there's a couple of different ways of changing your default. The first is you go to draw a markup, whatever it is, you change the properties of the markup to whatever you want them to be, and then before you start placing items into your drawing, you go to the left-hand side of the properties toolbar where it shows you the markup type you're working with. And just like last week, I mentioned these little chevrons. There's a chevron there indicating that there are choices underneath here that you can use if you choose to do so. Well, now that I've got my cloud type set the way I want it, and I'll modify this to where it's orange, with, again, a screened value in there and a little bit smaller cloud size. I'm going to set that as my default even before I draw my cloud. So now I've done two things. I've established a standard and I've also set it as the default on my machine. So as I continue to draw the, in particular clouds, I'm going to get all the characteristics that I wanted. But what if I already did a bunch and I wanted to change some of the things that were there? That's possible. The other way you can set a particular series of properties as a default is you can go into a drawing that has what you want. You can select that markup and you can right click, and right near the bottom of your right click is a button that says set as default. Previously I had set it to that orange color as a background, but now I've changed it again. So if I come draw a cloud, it's going to be green because I've reestablished my default. But if there's already stuff on the drawing that you like and you just like to capture the characteristics and apply it to other items, you can do that. It's one of those right-click options. When you choose a markup and you right-click on it, there's an entire menu of things that you can do to these markups, including cut, copy, paste, delete. You can flatten them. You can assign them to a specific layer, which is always a good idea. That'll come in handy when we start talking about the markup list. You could change their order, alignment. There's just a big long list. But one of the ones near the top is called Format Painter. Now, if you're familiar with CAD applications, it's like a properties match or copy properties function where you choose that and then it turns your mouse into a little paintbrush as you hover over other markups. So it's already gathered all the characteristics of this cloud. So if I go to another markup and I click on it, it changes the characteristics of that markup to match the one that I have copied from. And it will work with different markup types. Now this down here is a polygon, not a cloud. But if I go do a format painter on it, it's going to make it look like a cloud. But if you come back later on and click on it and look down in the markup list, it's not a cloud, it's a polygon, which means it's going to have the behaviors and the rules that are applied to polygons, not clouds or not rectangles. So even though you change the way something looks, does not mean you've changed its underlying character and the way it behaves and the things that you can and cannot do with it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete quite a few of these things here. And I'm going to talk about manipulating markups that are already on the drawing. Now this blue cloud here, for example, if I grab that, what can I do with it? Well, if I right click on it, I can cut it, which takes it away, and then I can paste it. So we've got that. I can also leave it where it is and I can copy it and paste it, like any other program, makes sense. But I can also move it by clicking and dragging it and relocate it along those lines. But what if I wanted to move it, but I wanted it to go exactly horizontally or exactly vertically? You can do that as long as you click and drag with the Shift key held down. So now as I click and drag, it's still going to do a move, but only in either a vertical or horizontal orientation. Well, that's fine and dandy, but I wanted to copy it. You can do the same thing. You can hold down the Control key on your keyboard and click and drag your cloud or any markup type. I'm just using clouds as an example here. And you can see that I can drag it wherever I want it and drop it, and it's going to place it there. But again, what if I want to copy it, but I want it to be absolutely vertical or horizontal? You just combine those shortcut keys. If I grab that and I hold down both the Control and the Shift key and I click and drag and move this cloud over, for example, it made a copy of it, but it made it exactly horizontal, and I can continue and click and drag and make one that's exactly vertical from the secondary one. You can also take advantage of markups that are already in the drawing by turning on your lock, your snap lock to markups. It's down in the status bar. It's right next to reuse, and it says snap to markups the same way it says snap to content. So if I say snap to markups, now when I go in here and start to place like a polyline, you'll notice all of these projected intersection lines that are popping up where it's showing me, it's giving me the opportunity to enter a data point that will start my new markup at exactly where these things would have, like the center of this and the edge of that and so on and so forth. So it's a real handy tool if you need to be able to draw new markups that have some sort of relationship with ones that are already there. And here it's snapping to every one of the little arcs of the cloud that are associated with that. Now this is a polyline, so to terminate a polyline as you're placing it, you need to ultimately end with a double click. And when you double click, then it's going to place not a single line or a collection of single lines, but a series of data point vertices that together make up a polyline. Now, I'm going to move into tools and go into some of the measure tools that are here and talk about the differences between them. And there's a couple of examples on the screen that I want to point out. Down here, we have two dimensions. One of them is just pretty graphics. It's just a markup. It's called a dimension. And that comes from this command right here. The way that command works is you place a data point and another data point, and it can't calculate the scale, it can't calculate the distance. You have to type in a value for what that is representing, and obviously it's not going to be accurate. The other tool available to you from these standard toolbars is the ability to put a length measurement markup. Now that won't work if your document hasn't already been calibrated. Now under Tools, Measure, the very first thing on the menu is Calibrate. And there's two ways of calibrating. In your navigation bar over the right-hand side here, it will tell you whether or not your document has been set to a particular scale. You can change that at any time by just clicking on it. And it'll ask you, do you want to calibrate by two known dimensional points, or do you want to use an input, a standard preset scale value, which is what I've been doing a lot of lately, even though I still believe the two known points is the more accurate method of calibrating, because you don't know who produced the PDF from whatever application and whether they plotted it to scale accurately or not. So I don't tend to use these presets, but they are convenient. And for this particular example, I just set it to 1/8 of an inch equals a foot earlier today. Which means now, instead of using this pretty graphic that really has no intelligence, if I come down here and place a linear measurement and hit a data point and come over and hit another data point, I'll be able to see what the actual dimension of that is, as opposed to just what somebody typed in there. And also down in the markup list, you can see the results of that. I've got two items here. One, if I click on that, tells me that it's a dimension and it thinks it's 10 feet, but there's no actual length value to it. And then I've got one here that is a length measurement based on an established scale, and it knows that it's 15 feet 11 inches. And that's a major difference between just something that looks pretty and something that actually has some intelligence to it. Now, all of these are examples of creating markups from scratch, but there are other ways of creating markups. I'm going to open a document here that is, in essence, an electrical legend, and on it are a series of symbols that would be used in this particular project. And those are perfect examples of where you might want to steal from a drawing that already has some standard stuff inside of it. And for my example, I'm going to use this circle with the letter J in it for the junction box. And the way you go about that is you use a PDF content editing feature called Snapshot. It's under Edit, and right near the bottom here is PDF content. And there are several different things you can do in there. The first of which is Snapshot Content, and right above that is just plain and simple Snapshot. And those are a little bit different. This one will capture anything with PDF content, and if there's a markup drawn on top of it, it will capture that too. This one, what it will do is capture the content, and it will ignore any portion of a markup that happens to be right on top of that particular item. It's just an easier way of filtering out any markups that might be in the way. for what I'm doing, either one of them will work fine because there are no markups in the way. And all you have to do is just like with a rectangle, you can click and drag, or you can hit, like here, I can hit multiple vertices and work my way around that symbol in order to capture it, eventually double clicking, or I could just click and drag with a rectangle and get what I'm after. Now it's in your clipboard, and to use it, you would need to paste it back into the document and then do something with it. Now, what most people do with it is they put it into a tool chest, into one of these tool sets for future use. And we're going to be talking about nothing but that next week. But what you can do is when you get it back in here, let's say you wanted all of those to be noticeably a different color, you can right click on it. You can go down to where it says change colors. It'll show you the source colors of the captured input. Then you can come down and decide that, I want it to look like that instead, or maybe I want it orange or something along those lines, so that you can alter its appearance before you put it into a tool set, or you can just simply start copying it and placing it. It's right there in your clipboard, and until you cut or copy or put something else into the clipboard, you can just continue to right click and paste it wherever you need it in a particular document. So if I come back over here and just hit paste, I'll have that same image. In fact, if I just hit a standard Windows command of Shift Input, it'll continually place them into the drawing wherever you want to paste them in there. Now I want to talk about copying markups from one page to another and some of the tools that are available to help you with that. I'm going to choose Select, and I'm just going to randomly grab a bunch of this stuff, probably not all of it. And I'm going to right click, and I'm going to do a copy. So I have all of that now in my clipboard. If I go to thumbnails, this document has another 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper in it. And if I come in here and paste, it does it, but it's not exactly where I wanted it to be. Plus, there are measurement markups in that buffer that don't have a scale value to work with. So before I can even paste it in there accurately, I really need to change the scale on that page, and then I can paste it. That solves one problem, but now they're still not exactly where they were before, and I wanted to make an exact copy of them. You can do that, and you can do it with your keyboard, or you can go down to Edit. And when you're in here and you want to do a paste in the exact same place, instead of a Control V or a paste, you do a Control Shift V or a paste in place. And that's what I'm doing here, Control Shift V, and it's pasting that collection of markups from page 1 into page 2 at exactly where they belong. And because the scale has been established, I'm now getting the same values that I did from page 1. But now let's look at page 3, which is a 34 by 22 inch sheet of paper. It also doesn't have a scale set, so I'm going to input the scale real quick and say that that's 1/8 of an inch. But now I'm going to use the same exact command, Control Shift V, and I'm going to paste it in there. Well, it doesn't look the same. Did it do anything wrong? No, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do. And here's how it's determining the logic and performing the function. Whatever page you're on, as your mouse is tracking around on the screen, if you will look in the far lower right-hand corner of the interface, all the way down in here in the status toolbar, you will see constantly changing coordinate values. The global origin of every sheet of paper is the upper left-hand corner. That's 0, 0. And then as you move over in the X direction, it's obviously growing higher. And then as you go down, it's growing higher in the Y direction. Now that, to me, threw me off at first because I'm used to the Cartesian coordinate system where you go over and up for positive values and you go over and down for negative values in the Y, but that's just not the way this system works. It starts here and it goes over and down in a positive value. So if I hover my mouse on that piece of text, the upper left-hand corner is roughly 1.56 by 0.28. And if I go into page 2, it put it at exactly the same coordinate value. It just looks consistent because the overall sheet of paper is the exact same size. If I come down into here and I zoom into that same area and hover over that same area over there, it's still doing the same. I'm moving my mouse around so these values aren't showing up the same, but technically they're exactly in the same location. The problem is the sheet of paper is much bigger, so it just makes it look like it performed something incorrectly, even though it did perform it in a proper way. So keep that in mind. Even though you take markups from one page and put them into another page, how they work and perform and behave and look will depend upon the size of the sheet of paper, the scale values, and where those markups came from originally. Now we're going to move on to the stamps and the markup list. Stamps, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to delete this document altogether without saving changes. I'm going to say I'm going to close this one, and I'm going to say create a new document from scratch. This is an empty 8.5 by 11. And if I go to Tools and I go to Stamps, there's a whole bunch of delivered example stamps. A stamp, as you can tell from the file name, is nothing but a small PDF file. So you can create them and just put them in a particular location and you've got a stamp. But there's a system involved to help you do that more easily, and that's under the stamp menu at the bottom. There's an interface right here that says, I want to create a stamp. It'll automatically know that you're creating a stamp and where you're going to put it, and it'll activate the interface that lets you do it properly. So if I say I want to create a stamp, it brings up this dialog box saying, well, what's the name of it going to be? And do you want to use your name as the author? And is there a particular template you want to use? And you just answer these questions. And if I just leave this as it is, it's going to create a 4-inch by 2-inch stamp that I can come in and start putting stuff on top of. I can come in and put a border as a rectangle. I can come in and dump a piece of text in there that says, from the desk of, whatever it is you're wanting to put inside of your rubber stamp. But here's what makes them special. You can make it look any way you want and save your stamp, and it's just going to place it again and again and again and again. But down here, when you're using this interface and you're creating a stamp, look for that button that says Dynamic. That gives you the opportunity to put inside of your stamp an area where information is automatically extracted from the computer operating system itself and put into your stamp every time you place it into a drawing. So if you come in here and say, you know what, I want to know what today's date is, what this stamp is going to do is it's going to say from the desk of, and I'll edit that, from the desk of TPC on. Right? So I got this neat little thing here called stamp, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to save it. So I've got a stamp called stamp. Now when I go into Tools and I say I want to place a stamp and I go look for it, it's right there. It just created it with a very creative name. And if I say stamp and just hit a data point, it's gone exactly 4 inches by 2 inches as far as paper space, and it's put from the desk of TPC on, and then I obviously didn't type that in. It extracted it from the computer system and put that information in there. And that's an example of using and creating stamps. Now, you can see quite a few of these delivered ones. There's one here called Draft Print. If I click that, it's got the same thing. This is static, this is dynamic. Here it's asked for the date, here it's asked for the time. You can also have it put in your username and the name of the file, and you saw there's a whole menu of things that you can extract and put into your stamps. You can also scale the stamps as you're placing them. I'm just hitting a single data point, which makes it come in at its originally created size. To make it smaller or bigger, you can click and drag it and place it dynamically to the scale value you want, and it'll adjust everything to fit within those particular parameters. I've got a question on the screen I'm going to respond to while we're here. Somebody asked the question of what if we have multiple scales on a single drawing, and that's a great question. So I'm going to go grab one just real quick and respond to that. I think everybody would benefit from it. I'm going to do a file open And I'm going to go to, bear with me as I find this. There we go. This will be a good example. All right, so here's a architectural detail sheet that has scale values of 3/4 of an inch equals a foot, 3 inches equals a foot, you know, pretend this is 1/4 of an inch equals a foot and that sort of thing. What you can do is you can pick the scale that is most common. In this case, it's 3 inches equals a foot. And I would go in and I would click on that and I would say, I want the scale to be, and I would go and choose the standard option of 3 inches equals a foot, which you can tell I've already done. And what I've done is I've established the scale for the whole sheet of paper. So then I come down here and I'm looking at this one that is not 3 inches equals a foot, it's 3/4 of an inch. And under the measurement panel on the left-hand side, whenever that situation presents itself, you have to use something called a viewport in order to, within a single page, establish an alternative scale value. So here, what I would do is I would go into viewports. If these weren't already here, let's say that was empty, I would hit that plus sign right there. And it says draw a box around the region you're interested in, and I would come and click and drag and say, all right, for this area of this drawing, then it says, well, what scale is that? And that's when I would come and say, well, that section of the drawing is 3/4 of an inch versus 3 inches equals a foot. And you could have as many of those viewports in there as you want. Then when you start drawing markups, you'll be able to draw those from scratch. But if you start using markups from a tool set, you can choose whether or not to apply a scale value and have it automatically adjust the size of standard symbols to account for not just the scale of the sheet of paper, but for the scale of any viewports that are in there as you're placing them in there. But I'm not going to show that today because that's part of what we'll be showing next week when we're going into detail on these tool sets. Someone also asked, is there a way to place a markup in the document to an exact value? The question you're asking about is called sketch to scale. It works just like normal markups. Here I'm creating a blank document from scratch. I cannot do that until the document has a scale, so I have to calibrate it one way or another. For here, I'm going to say that this is 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, and just apply that scale. So that now if I come in here and draw a linear measurement from here to here, instead of guessing, it knows that that's 30 feet. Now, you ask about drawing to scale. That is underneath Tools, Sketch to Scale. Once you have a document with a scale applied, now that enables the use of these tools. And it's a limited set: rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and polyline. So if you wanted to draw a rectangle to an exact number, now that you have a scale, you would click and drag it over, and instead of graphically guessing at what it is, you would type in an exact value. So I'm going to say 20. I'm hitting the tab key on my keyboard to get to the height, and there I'm going to put in 10. And I'm not going to move my mouse at all. I'm just going to hit the enter key, and it's going from where I started, exactly 20 feet and exactly 10 feet down. And we can verify that by choosing to place an area measurement and snapping to it. And having it tell us that it's exactly 20 by 10 and what the square footage of that value would be. I'm going to go into another file, and I'm going to open this file called Floor Plan. Now this is a 2D floor plan that came from a 3D Revit model, and inside of it I placed these red markups, and each of these markups has information associated with them, that it's either a ceiling mounted or wall mounted light fixture with a certain wattage, a certain lumen value, a certain voltage, and that type of thing. And these columns of information that you see are not normal, they're not typical, they're what are called custom columns. And they're just one feature of the markup list that's important to understand and take advantage of. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to come back to this in just a moment. I'm going to open one other file. Here's a map of the US where I've done some sort of a poor man's GIS type of interface where I put shapes for states and counties and cities and population values and so on. And you can see all of that information displayed in custom columns as well. So, but as I change from one document to the next, you'll notice that this interface here doesn't have the same custom columns that this document does. And what that is telling you is that custom columns are associated with the drawing in which you create them, unless you make it part of the profile, the overall look and feel and behavior of Bluebeam that we talked about last week. And even then, if you set up a series of custom columns and you save that to your profile, it doesn't impact documents that have already been created. It only impacts new documents from that point forward. So you really need to understand, if you're going to use custom columns, how they behave and what part is controlled through the profile, and really what part is controlled through the actual PDF file itself. So I'm going to start with a brand new empty 8.5 by 11 as usual. And when I open that, you'll see the markup list with none of that custom stuff in there. This is more typical of what you're probably seeing. So how do you control this thing? What is it? The markup list, for lack of a better word, it's a database inside of your PDF file that every time you do something, I draw a highlight, right? I draw a cloud. I come in and I draw a line with an arrow. I draw a polygon. Right? I draw a polyline. Whatever I'm doing in here, it's keeping track of what I did. And if I go and turn on some of the information that's being captured that I'm not displaying, all of that information is under markup list, under columns. And when you go to columns, there's an entire list of things that are being tracked that you can choose to display or not. I did not bother to enable who created that markup. I can turn that on and off by just the click of a button. I did not bother with the date that that particular markup was created. There's a series of things that I'm just not bothering with in here, but you can turn those on and off by checking those off in that pick list. You can also change the order in which things are displayed by just grabbing and dragging. So if I wanted comments to be the thing closest to subject, I could just grab it and drag it. And if you'll notice, very, very tiny little white triangle at the top of each vertical line is indicating, would you like to drop it here? And when you let go, it's going to allow you to resort or reorder from the left to the right or right to the left, the order in which these particular columns of information are being displayed. If you want to manipulate your document to have special information, you would go into columns, and at the very bottom of that interface is the Manage Columns button, and that opens up your list of columns where you can go in and you can grab certain ones here, and you can have a permanent modification to the order in which they show up in that menu. But right beside that is custom columns. And we don't have time today to go into how to create custom columns, but in here you can create your own series of custom column values that are either independent or they have relationships with each other. You could put a value in there that says, if I place a square footage representing the area of a room and I tell you that it's carpet, I want that to be a different price than Berber carpet and a different price than tile. Or if you're working in the highway industry, you could go in there and place a square footage shape that says, I want to know what the square footage of concrete is, but if I apply a value for depth, I also want to know the cubic yards of concrete that are relevant to that. And all of that type of information can be done, and it can be displayed and tracked in these custom columns. And the ones I'm using here are just some examples of what you can do with custom columns in this markup list. Now, if all you could do was create a custom column and put it inside of a PDF, and I had to share that PDF with you, it wouldn't be of as much value unless I could share it in a different way. And you can share it in a number of ways through this button right here that's called Summary. Now I have Review 2019 running in the background. This is one example here I'm going to show you of differences between the interface. Review 2019 has the markup list over here where you can click on it and it's got columns and it's got the same sort of thing. But then right beside that is the filter, and then I'm using it in view only mode right now, so it's not showing the little icon, but typically right here is an icon that looks like a clipboard with notes on it, and that's where you export reports of your markup data. Well, they changed that completely. They took the filter, moved it from here, put it over here, and they replaced that little clipboard looking icon with this one. It does the same exact functionality. When you click on it, it says, do you want to take all of this wonderful, useful information that you've got, and do you want to dump it out to a printer, to a PDF file, to an XML formatted document so it can be shared programmatically, or to like a comma separated file? In essence, we'll open it up in Excel. You can control the columns of information here. I know that I don't care about length or space or author or count or even layer on this particular report that I'm running. So you can modify which columns are of interest to you or not. You can filter and sort them. Tremendous amount of filtering and sorting you can do there. And then you can choose your output methodology, and all the various tools are there. But eventually you're going to hit OK, and it's going to dump that out, and then it will automatically launch that into Excel so that you could take it and manipulate that information and share that information with someone who's never even heard of Revu. You know, your upper management wants reports on certain pieces of information. Well, by doing what you're doing in Revu to create that data, maintain that data, then you can share that data by doing these summary reports that are there. Another thing you can do with a markup list that I want to talk about before we run out of time today, and then there are a whole bunch of questions I'm going to try to get to in the next few minutes. And again, if I don't get to them, I'll add some responses in the video before I upload it to YouTube. You can take markups on one document and you can copy those markups and you can share that on a different document. To illustrate that, I'm going to go here. Here I've got a floor plan that has all these red markups on it, and you can see them all down here. And if I go open up this document that says with spaces, there are no markups in it. You can see that it's completely empty. Now, what it does have are space names. It knows that that is room 305, and that is room 314, and that is room 317. It does have that information that came from Revit, or you could create from scratch, but in this case, it came from Revit. But it has no markups in it whatsoever. This one has markups, and I'd like to copy this information. Let's say for the sake of argument, this is floor level 3 and this is floor level 4, and it's almost exactly the same. And instead of drawing it all from scratch, I'd rather steal from this one, pop it over there, and then edit what's different. I want to be as efficient as possible with that. You can do that in here. You could go into your markups list, and instead of dumping a report, you can go down here to where it says markups, and there's an export import option right there. I'm going to export these markups. Right? I'm going to say markups, export, and it creates what is called a BAX file. There's a whole bunch of B something X files. There's a BPX, that's a Bluebeam Profile Exchange document. And then there's a BTX, a Bluebeam Toolset Exchange. This is just one of many, and it's for annotations, you know, what they refer to, you know, markups as annotations. So this is a Bluebeam Annotation Exchange file, a BAX file. You can put it wherever you want. I'm going to dump it to my desktop. It's called Floor Plan 3. I'll even change it to say new. There's one that I created earlier, but this one is called new. Now, if I come in here and I go to that empty document, it's got spaces, but it doesn't have any markups at all. And I go and I do an import. I just have to choose that file. I can go there, I can choose that BAX file and import it. Not only does it take them and put them where they belong, because it had spaces in there and because that relationship is understood geographically, now if I sort by space, I can see every one of these rooms, and I can see every one of the lighting fixtures that I just cut and copied, or copied and pasted into this document. But let's say you didn't want everything from one document to another. You know, I don't want all of them. Well, that's another example of what you can do between your files, and it's another example, and it'll be the last one I show today, of why it's so important to think about the use of layers when you're dealing with Bluebeam. I'm going to open this file that I had open called Revu 20. Not only did I draw these shapes and put these county boundaries and cities and all that sort of thing, but I put them on specific layers. So if I come here to layers, I can turn it off by city, state, county, and so on. And that gives me a couple of capabilities. One is to copy that information and share it on another file like we just talked about. But it also gives me a great deal of filtering here through this new filter capability, which is brand new in Revu 20. It's very different than Revu 2019. Revu 2019 looked different, it behaved different, it has a lot less capabilities than what this has. What this has is I go in here and I say I want to filter, and it says, well, what do you want to filter on? I can just go straight to county, and I can click on that, and I can choose, for example, 2 counties. I want El Paso and Galveston counties, just those 2. It's as simple as a click and another click, and I'm done. In Revu 2019, I would have to go to that column, I'd have to tell it I want to use custom filtering, and I would have to say I want the county of El Paso or equals the county of Galveston. It would be a multi 4 or 5 step procedure, and it's so much easier and cleaner now. And it opens up the door for this type of manipulation where I can now come in here and I can say, I further want to filter this with a custom value where I can say that it is greater than any population that's greater than 50,000 and is less than or equal to 700,000 and apply that value. And now it's filtered out the one city location that doesn't meet my particular search criteria. And now I can see highlighted over here El Paso and Galveston County and the results that match my filtering. But here's the greatest value of it in Revu 20 is that information, that filtered way of filtering data to display it in a way that is useful to you can now be saved under whatever name you want to put it in, and you can have a series of saved filters. So as you're working with your data, you can just turn those filters on and off as you see it convenient, and it's a wonderful new capability in Revu 20. But as it relates to taking information from one document and putting it onto another and not taking the entire markup list, that is done through layers. A lot of people I talk to are unaware that this command exists. I'm going to undo the filters completely, and I'm going to look at my layers. I've got layers for state shapes, county shapes, and city shapes, and if I go to cities, just those cities. That's what I want to take from this document and share with a similar document, not the entire thing. Well, if I go to Markups List and I export, it doesn't matter what layer it's on, it doesn't matter your filters, none of that stuff makes any difference at all. It dumps the entire database. But what you can do is if you've used layers, you can go select that layer and you can right click and you can say export the layer to a page. Right? Now that's going to create an empty page. All right, so I'm just going to dump it to my desktop. It's called USA Map Revu 20 Layer. It's already there. I'm going to overwrite it. And it's in essence just the information, just the metadata, just the knowledge that you're looking for. But that can then be merged into another document. So if I go and open a empty USA Map and I tell it down here, I want to take markups and import them, and it says, well, where do you want to import them from? You know, I could go to the desktop and I could re-import that BAX file, but again, it would give me everything. What I want is just the layer PDF, and it's not a BAX, it's just a PDF file. And when I import it, now it puts just the information that I wanted into a particular, in the location where it belongs, and it's filtered out into a completely separate file, just the specific information I was looking for. Okay, I'm checking the clock. We're right exactly at 1 hour. I'm running through the list of notes. Oh, the last thing I was going to show you today about the markup list, which I think is critically important, so I'll do that. That won't allow me to respond to questions, but I will put those into the video, is statuses. I can't express enough the importance of statuses. In this example here, I'm using a roadway example, but this will work with any industry. Statuses allow you to keep track of the condition or status of a given piece of a project. Like here, for these are zones of a construction project along a roadway. If I click on zone number 3, I can right click and I can set the status right here. and I can have a series of different status models, different examples of ways of tracking project progress. And I can say that that section of this roadway has had the utilities installed. And I can come back and I can choose this one and I can do the same thing. That one has also had the utilities installed. But later on, this one moved on and it is now set to where it's been graded, and then later on the team made more progress and now it's been set to forms have been installed. And not only is it tracking that, what makes statuses unique is that in the column it doesn't just track who did what when, it tracks the chronological history of who did what when and keeps it in that markup list database, so that you can have a historical reference to when that happened. All other markups, if I go in there and change something for what it is to what I want it to be, it shows what I did, that I did that and I changed it, but then it just shows the most up-to-date latest information. It does not show a chronological history, and that's exactly what statuses are all about. So if you haven't experimented with statuses, make sure you do. And with that, I'm going to wrap up today's webinar. Again, there are probably 7 questions that I did not have time to respond to, and I'll put those in the video, and I'll upload the video to YouTube. It'll take a couple of days to get it up there, and I will end with just a quick reminder of what's coming next week. And next week, we'll be going into tool sets and getting every ounce of efficiency and productivity that you can out of a tool set using Bluebeam Revu. Thank you for joining me. Again, if you fill out that survey and you indicate that you are interested in talking about your training needs, be sure to put your contact information in there and you'll hear from me in just a day or so. Have a great day, everyone. After reviewing the list of questions, there were a total of 4 that I didn't answer live during the webinar, so I'll address those now. The first one is, when I change my setup and standards for all my element types, can I save that and share it with other people? That's the exact purpose of these tool sets, is to be able to create a library of pre-created symbology of a certain combination of layer and color and line style and fonts and sizes and just all of that, and have it standardized, put it into a library and share that library. And that's the entire focus of next week's webinar, so definitely come back for that. The next question was, I've created a bunch of stamps and I'd like to delete some of them, but I don't see an easy way to do that. Well, it's not an easy way, but there is a simple way. If I go to Tools and go to Stamp, and I go and let's say, for example, I've got this one that I created called MSCA Static and Dynamic Stamp that I want to get rid of. The simple way to do that is to choose any other stamp and hit the pencil icon to edit the stamp itself. It's just a shortcut way of getting to their folder. Then when you're there, right-click and tell it to Save as if you're going to save it under some other name, but instead just use that as your Windows Explorer interface and grab the stamps that you want to get rid of and hit the delete key. Even though it thinks you're in the process of saving a file, you can fool it temporarily. Hit cancel, close that down, and now when you go back to your list of stamps, the stamps you've deleted are no longer displayed in your stamps list. The next question was, can you change the units of measure from square footage to something else? Absolutely. I'm going to create a blank file from scratch. I'm going to set my scale. I'll just use one of the available preset ones, and this time I'll just use a different style. I'll say 1 to 50. It really doesn't matter what it is. And I'll come in and I will place an area measurement, and I'll just click and drag from here to here, and it tells me it's 82.71 square feet. There's lots of things that you can do to change that. If you go up to the property toolbar, there's a button included in there called units. You can click on it and you can change it right there. You can say that I really didn't want square feet, I want square yards or square miles or square meters, or in the case of your question, acres. Right? And I'll hit that. Now that's a really small portion of an acre, and you're seeing that it's coming back with 0. If you go over to the side panels and you go to Properties, you'll see in here a series of options that you can make, and in particular we're going to come back to show caption. But there's also a measurement panel, And inside of that measurement panel, there's a bunch of modifications you can make here as well. Instead of going to the property toolbar, you can make those same changes here, but you can also change your precision here as well. So based on that scale, these are the default precisions, and I'm going to come in there and just kick it up a notch so that when I change from square feet to acres, it's actually going to give me an answer instead of rounding down to the point where it just zeroes out. Now, if you notice, there's for this area measurement, there's a depth applied to that of 8 feet in this example, and we could set that to whatever we want. But if we go back now down to properties and we go into that show caption edit, let's say that this was a room and we were doing square footage and we knew that it was 83 square feet, but we also are trying to calculate the cost of painting the walls or doing drywall on the walls. So there's a variable inside of here that is just not being displayed that is being calculated based on the height of the walls. So if we were to choose to turn on that information and set our measurement back to square feet, now we'd be able to have it communicate to us, well, the room itself is 82 square feet, but to paint the walls, you're going to need enough paint or drywall to cover 293 square feet. So your question is a great question. I hope a lot of people benefit from that, but it's a combination of what you choose in the measurement panel, the properties panel, and any of the variables that you change here under units. One last thing about this is there's a special little tool in the property toolbar over here called totals. You can actually click on that and tell it to detach it. And you can have a floating summary of all the various measurements that whatever you're doing with a measurement markup will be summarized into that little window. And you can leave it there, or at any time you can reattach it and just always have it available as a quick pull down. And the last question had to do with when I insert a signature into a stamp and then I place it, the white background of the signature covers up the stuff behind it. Now, this is what I think you're saying there. All right, I'm going to kill this. I'm going to go open another file. I'm going to do a file new from a template. I'll choose an RFI and I'll come down here and I will just, I'll place an image in there and then we'll get to the stamp part of that. If I come in here and I say, hey, I want to place an image in there and I choose my signature and I place my signature in here, the problem with that is that, and technically, legally, I have electronically signed this document, not digitally, but electronically signed it. But even then, the problem with it is that I can't see through it. Now, there's lots of things you can do to make the background white color transparent, but if you go over to properties, when you're dealing with an image like this, you can come in and there's some variables that you can change. Like you can come in here and say that, I want to mask the white color, and then that will help you get the result that you're looking for. And you can also change opacity, and there's some things in there to tweak that. And that's what I've done is I've created a stamp that has nothing but my signature in the stamp, and now I'm going to go use that. I'll go to stamps. It's called SIG test, and I'll just pop it in there. And just like when I was using just an image, I can control, through those variables, how it looks and feels and so on. And when I'm using a stamp, I get this added variable of a blend mode. And if you toggle that, try these various different ones and see if the results that pop up are what you're looking for. The multiply, most effective for what I think you're trying to do, and I hope that answers your question. That's it. I hope you find this video helpful, and you'll review the other videos available as well.